We are back with the GTHL's second season of our Breakout Podcast. We're very excited to get started with a couple of pretty great guests. First, we have Kurt Weaver, Chief Operating Officer of You Can Play, and Bayne Pettinger as well, an NHLPA certified agent, and also a coach of the U14 Don Mills Flyers in our league. Two great voices to share on today's podcast. So we're really excited to get going, and thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So we'll just jump. For those who don't know, the GTHL and You Can Play officially partnered back in July of 2022, so this past summer. Our partnership will primarily focus on training for staff, coaches, officials, and our players, among other things, like creating engaging and easy to grasp messaging to empower our participants and the league as a whole, with the end goal to really show and create more of those safe spaces in sport. Specifically in the locker room. So Kurt, for you, obviously we're one of your newest partners, but You Can Play has been rolling for 10 years. I think it's your 10th anniversary this year as you're celebrating that. So tell us a little bit about what You Can Play is up to.
Yeah, it's been great to be, anytime you can celebrate a 10-year anniversary in a nonprofit, it's always a success. So that's a great thing to have. And also I think all 10 years have been really working on hockey, and that's been our core game that we've been working with for a long time. So it's great to have some partners for that long and to get to know them that much and to be able to work with them. I think in the past we started really at that pro level to then get the voice out there as large and as far as we could, and to say, listen, this is an issue. Homophobia in sport is a challenge. It's keeping people from playing the sport. It's keeping people who are in the sport from playing their best. And this is really where we want to start the issue and dive into it. And through the years, we've expanded into a bunch of different areas just because of need. And certainly one of those things has been into education programs, into youth sports. We can't just start at the top, sort of at the end result. We have to start where the challenges are and where the kids are either being welcomed to or driven from sport. And so the last few years, we've really been drilling in and focusing on educating coaches and referees and officials and parents and administrators and the athletes themselves. But that's been a really great update to our programming, as well as then to take partners like yourself. And you have access to so many great kids, coaches, parents, families, and the game at its core, truly. And that's where the change gets made, whatever it is. So if it's going to be a rule change, if it's going to be a heart and soul change, that's just really where that kind of work gets done.
Well, and you mentioned You Can Play started at the pro level, so I'm just going to shift over to Bayne. Obviously, you have a lot of experience there. Well, you started out, I believe, as formerly a manager of hockey operations at Hockey Canada, and now you're obviously an agent for professional hockey players in the NHL and other ranks. So in terms of the discussion around inclusion, how has your experience been at the pro level in that area?
Yeah, for me, well, first of all, thanks for having me on. As well as Kurt there, it's great to anytime we can talk about these subject matters, especially at the grassroots level with the GTHL. So thank you for giving the platform there, first of all. But for me, I wear, as you said, multiple hats. I'm a certified NHLPA agent. I am a coach in the G. I'm also a gay man. So I wear, sometimes they cross over, but for me at the pro level, when I came out quite publicly almost 2.5 years ago now, it was eye-opening, the acceptance level, and not just acceptance, but embracement level, and it's almost been a taboo subject, but when I reached out to guys like Morgan Riley, Sidney Crosby, Connor McDavid to be a part of my story of coming out and show their support for me, it was a resounding yes. How can I help? Let me be a voice, and so it shows that the hockey world isn't as big and bad as we think it is, and that goes for executives as well. I made a list of 20 people to tell, or 25 people, and some of them were big names in hockey. And, the resounding excitement and, enthusiasm for me to live my true life, and my truth, really, that's all it is, was resoundingly positive. So I think it shows from the pro level to the U14 Don Mills Flyers that I coach. It's not even like, I don't even think about it. I remember in my fear of coming out, it was, oh, I'm going to be exiled from hockey, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. And then once once you do it, you're embraced, and you can actually, I'm a better coach, I'm a better agent, I'm a better brother, a better uncle, because I don't have that weight on my shoulders. And, the hockey world isn't alone, and we still have a long way to go, but I think that we're making the right steps in discussions like this, and initiatives around the game at the pro and the minor hockey level.
Well, and you mentioned your coming out story, and that was in November of 2020. So over the last couple of years have felt very, very long for a lot of us. It really wasn't too long ago that happened. And for those who might not know the origins of that story, was it a buildup for you to make that decision? Was it kind of a light switch moment where you just felt you had to do it? Or what really compelled you to finally make that decision?
Yeah, for me, everyone looks back and hates COVID, the time they went home and kind of, had to, everyone picked up a hobby or a show or whatever. For me, in the agent world and in my life, you go, go, go. You're on to the next task. You're at another minor hockey tournament. You're at a camp. You're meeting a prospect. For me, the slowdown in COVID let me really, put down the cell phone and the work, because hockey stopped as the world stopped, and you kind of sit there and go, okay, what's next for me with my personal life. I was out to my family for a couple of years, and close friends, but I never thought I could combine my success in the hockey world and my personal life. So through COVID, I know everyone hates it, but for me, it was really a point of reflection to sit back and let the noise kind of fade away, and me to focus on me. And really, that's where I had some good conversations with my family and friends and said, I think I'm ready to take this step. Never did I thought originally with my family, I'd put up an Instagram post. I never thought I'd do an article in The Athletic with Pierre LeBrun, but c'est la vie. And hey, I never pictured myself even 3 years ago being on a panel like this. So I'm happy to combine my worlds, and it was the best day of my life. It was nervous as all hell. I remember breaking out in hives right before the story broke. I think I actually phoned Pierre and asked him to pull the article, but he acted as a bit of a sports psych for me and said, "You've come this far, and it's already actually at the printer, so we can't pull it." But it really just opened up doors for me, and I'm happy to use my voice and my platform to educate and humanize. That's my biggest thing, is humanization, being in the rinks and being around, the youth that I coach and the youth that I advise. And really, humanization is really what I'm kind of set on my mission in eradicating, homophobia from the game of hockey.
Absolutely. And Kurt, there's something interesting there that Bayne mentioned in terms of humanizing, one, everyone, and two, the nerves, obviously, with making that decision and really committing and doing that. How much does You Can Play deal with those varying emotions in this space?
Every day, literally, right? So I think I love Bayne putting it the way that he did, in that the anxiety of that day of announcement, right? And what you don't think about is the anxiety of showing up to practice every day, or showing up to the job every day with that anxiety without announcing it. So all the days leading up to that was the anxiety of, what if somebody finds out? What if somebody finds out that I didn't want to know, or I get outed? I think that's where you find the challenge of why kids, adults, pros, amateurs have the challenge they do around sport with sexuality, and saying, I'm not my best on the ice when I'm not able to then be myself, or at the job, or anything in my life. And I think that's where we found that to be the case. And most athletes that reach out to have a conversation, or a coach who's considering coming out to their team, those are the conversations you're having. And I think that anxiety is prevalent everywhere in that kind of conversation. And I think a lot of times, like Ben has been saying, there's actually been some new data that came out that says it's been a lot more accepting for people to come out to their teams, whether it be a coach or an athlete or a referee or administrator. It's been a lot better lately, for more accepting, a warm environment. People have been really supportive and wonderful. And I think that the thought was, in the past, that was not quite the case. And the numbers back that up. And recently, there's been some new work that's been done. Outsports and others have done some great work on surveying, especially high school athletes, to say, no, it's been a very welcoming environment. And I've had a lot of support, but it doesn't get rid of the anxiety of the actual announcement or the day. Or, of course, coming out is never a one-day thing. And I think that's maybe what some people think it is, where it's just like, oh, just come out in one day, and I'm moving on my life. it's a journey. It's coming out to different groups of people in your life. It's your team at one point, your family at a different, your coach at a different point. And so that tends to take some time to do. And I think that's where helping athletes through those journeys and helping to support to then be supportive in that time is really, I mean, it's the fun of the work, right? Right. Is to be able to say, listen, this is going to happen to you if it hasn't already. How do we prepare you for these things? How do we prepare a coach for a conversation that will inevitably happen to you? And you're prepared for that athlete to come to you and say, hey, coach, I want to talk to you about something. And that's something a lot of coaches haven't thought through yet. And I think that's really, like I said, the fun for us is preparing them for those kind of conversations. That way, when they happen, they say, oh my gosh, you'll never believe I was ready for this conversation. I identified it when the athlete came to me, and I asked the right questions, and I was kind, and I was empathetic, and I did a great job. And so it's great to be able to hear those kind of stories as well.
Well, and how much of it do you think it's really, like you mentioned, just not being prepared, where it happens and the individual just is stuck and doesn't know the right things to say, or even if there is a right thing to say, and how much of it is just being prepared in that moment to make sure that space is safe?
We always, straight from our coach education, we tell people if you have kids that you're going to teach them a new way to shoot on goal, and you're going to have them do it the very first time on game day on the ice, they're going to fail at it. And so no matter what the conversation is, no matter what the way you want to approach this is, if you haven't practiced it and prepared yourself, you're not going to do well the first time, no matter who you are. And I think a lot of times we just rely on, especially from a coaching standpoint, or from a coworker standpoint, we rely on what we know, and we're going to ask those questions that come from a place that we either learned on TV or we think we should be asking in that situation, instead of maybe thinking through how it would actually go from a human element. And I think, like Bayne mentioned, it's the proximity to someone and being able to have a friend, a coworker, a family member. And at that point, you're a lot more prepared for that second conversation. But this is really where we go through in our education for athletes and for coaches, referees, and everyone else is, listen, let's get a few reps in this course to say, try this, actually have a conversation out loud right now. What would you say and how would you say it? To then be prepared for that. And also to know that each journey is going to be different and individualized, and know that you can't just pop these new athletes or people into a new box and say, oh, this is how I'm going to treat everybody because I now know how to do that. It's about having a conversation and just kind of figuring out what that person wants or needs in that situation. I think that's really been the fun for us, is again seeing people be open to that. And I think hockey itself does a great job with this. And I wish it got more credit around this, which is, it's hard to play hockey. You got to get up in the morning and you got to first of all drive to the ice with the bag that's that size and that weight. And you see the little kids walking in the rink with the bag of that size. I love that. And then just getting them to be able to show up, strap on all the equipment, get on the ice, be able to skate, add the skills of hockey to it. It's a challenging sport as it is. And I think hockey understands better than most that we don't want to exclude people for things that have nothing to do with, your end result of hockey on the ice, like sexuality, gender identity, race, religion, ethnicity. And I think that's where they do a really good job at this. And a lot of levels of hockey do a good job at this. And it's the errant, bad actor that ends up, again, kind of reinforcing that idea that, oh, hockey's a bunch of, idiots and doing this. And it's just not the case. And it's not our experience. And I think that's why we love working in hockey, because they take an honest attempt at this because they realize the challenge that hockey is in general. And I think that's where I've loved our time with GTHL and hockey in general, because it's been an open mind at every level.
And I found something interesting there that you said, in that it's okay to fail. So I think in today's conversation, a lot of people's fear comes from getting it wrong and the consequences that could come from making that honest mistake just because they're not prepared or educated. So how much of the fear of failure contributes to this conversation?
Oh, I think an immense amount. And we do education for parents. And I think that's where you really see it. And parents honestly want to know the information because they just want to know what the heck their kids are talking about. What's these terms that they're bringing home? And I drove 6 kids to hockey practice. They were talking and I understood very little of what they were saying. That's the kind of approach. And I think it's a fear of, I don't want to look dumb. So I'm not going to ask the question I really want to ask or I need to ask. So then when I'm put in the situation, I'm just stuck. And I think that's all of us, right? I think we I would imagine the first the first athlete that, Bayne worked with was like, I'm not sure what I'm doing here as an agent, but I'm going to dig in and I'm going to try this and I'm going to learn on the job. So I think we were all nervous that first time out. It's just trying to explain to coaches that these are the kind of extras to add on to your coaching regimen or to your, as a parent, putting in this time makes that so much easier. And so being able to, in your mind at night when you're alone, close your eyes and have that sample conversation to just think of what you would say and how you'd say it just once even. And it makes a huge difference as to when you actually do get confronted with that conversation. And I think it just makes you more willing to listen, ask questions, and allow that person to guide the conversation instead of be what a lot of times we're told to be as administrators or coaches or referees or parents, which is you should know what's going on, lead the conversation, and be the great person. That's just unrealistic. And I think that's where having the empathy to say, I may not have all the answers here, I'm going to ask a lot of questions. That's been a huge change and very valuable to those who are experiencing this.
And for Bayne, directly in the coaching space at the grassroots level, is this something you've ever experienced where individuals, whether parents, players, or officials that you're dealing with, just have that fear of not being able to handle it properly, so to speak?
Not so much, but I think, and I say this all the time with our young clients, I relate it to, they don't know what they don't know, right? If they're uneducated, and to go back to Kurt's piece there, to relate it to hockey versus a coming out process, if I have a client playing U16 that is heading into their OHL draft, the parents and the player think they're the first family to ever go through the OHL draft here, right? It's a million questions. What do you mean these scouts are coming up to me? What do you mean I have to go to a combine and, blah on my rankings and this and that? It's not, to relate it to hockey, the coming out process is, if you don't know if someone to show you the ropes per se, of, hey, this is what you're going to feel. This is how your day is going to be. You should probably tell some people before. Are you going to do an announcement versus are you going to tell people one by one? So it's no different than advisory coaching, a client through a hockey career in different phases to a coming out process, where if you have people ahead of you that have done it and are professionals in that space, you lean on those, right? It's like a coach or a driver's lesson. You would never hop into a car without taking a lesson first, right? So for me on the humanization side, I know I agree that hockey's come a long way, from where it was. And believe me, I wouldn't have come out 10 years ago if I didn't think that, or I would have, come out 10 years ago if I don't think it's made progressions. But I still do think, we live in Toronto, a very diverse city, the GTHL as well. I still hear from rural Quebec to Manitoba to the prairies where, I realize my white, cis male privilege, and I think that's important because my story was smooth, right? My parents were accepting, my coworkers, my friends, everyone. I never faced really any friction, the odd relationship that fell off for various reasons, but there's still kids out there that I get a DM from or whichever that say, hey, I want to tell my parents, but I'm afraid they'll kick me out. Right? Like there's still those issues, as much as we want to say it's kumbaya and we're all good, we still have to fight daily for equality, and rural towns still face that with these issues. And I think it goes back to even what just happened over the weekend in Colorado Springs, right? It's important. Just when we think we're ahead and society is normal and hockey's big and bad, we still don't have it sorted out in society. There's still mass shootings and still things going on against, hate crimes against the gay community that really make me sick. And, just when you think we're having progress and, doing the work that You Can Play does and that I try to do daily, through education and humanization, I still think we have a lot to go in the empathetic and just understanding what people are going through. And, the community isn't always, the visible minority, but you never know what's going on internally. I was for 10 years in the closet, and you hear slurs around the locker room, and then you hear, oh, that's so gay. And then you call people out on it, and they're like, well, what do you mean? And even now, people all catch friends saying like, well, Bayne wasn't around, so I could say that. You're like, well, no, it shouldn't take a gay person to be around to not say those words. Like, that's homophobic, right? So now it's, it's creating allies and straight allies that stand up for that language, that, oh, it doesn't, just because Bayne's not here doesn't mean, you know, you can't say that. So as much as we've come, and I think we are getting better, especially in the G, you know, and I see that daily. I'm in rinks every day, you know, literally. I'll be at Silver Stick this weekend. I think in society and hockey, we still have a ways to go. And, you know, and I think the Colorado shooting was just another example of that. And it's just sad to see, you know, and I think there's some world affairs going on as well, that we can hit on later. But yeah, I'm always a glass half full guy, but if it was all equal and all good, I don't think we'd be having podcasts like this.
Well, and you did highlight there's international things in the space that going on in this conversation. Obviously, I'm sure Kurt and You Can Play, you guys are still working hard to push that inclusive conversation forward. But when we compare, like you mentioned, Bayne, the society's issues back into sport, and then really just bring it down into a funnel and not look at it in such a big lens, what can you do, or what do you do with, let's say, your Flyers, for example, at the grassroots level, that can make that slight change in society's problems that has this group of young hockey players learning from you? Are there conversations you have?
Yeah, there is. And we just have you know, frankly, a zero tolerance policy around the coaching staff, you know, for any slurs of any kind, racial, homophobic, you know, and I think that starts with Don Mills, you know, obviously pumping their tires a bit, but I think they're a great, you know, organization in leading that. They're a very diverse organization, of people of color. You know, we come from the Scarborough East End there. So I think it's important that, you know, the kids see that. But with me, really what I find is it's not so much the youth. Like, I could only imagine what it's, as Kurt hit there, the language that they use, and going to high school these days, and the instant Snapchats and Instagrams, and these kids, I don't think they look at being gay as different, right? Like, I don't know what it's like to go to high school in 2020, but really for me, in my experience, it's the parents that, oh, I didn't have any gay friends. It's like, well, yeah, you did. They just weren't comfortable being around, right? And weren't comfortable speaking their truth. I think today, like youth, like I coach, like I said, the U14 team, I don't think it's a big deal to them. And like the clients that I came out to when I made a list, you know, a couple of them, I would say, hey, I need to FaceTime you. And they honestly thought I was like deathly ill when I told them I had something to tell them. And I told them I was gay, and they're like, oh, that's it? Okay. Like, you know, but the parents, some of the parents were like, oh, if that's what makes you happy, you know, and you're like, so I have a lot of faith. I know everyone, you know, kind of gets on these youth for, hey, how they're coming up and they don't respect work ethic or whatever. We sound like our parents when we say that, but like, I have, from an inclusivity standpoint, I have a lot of faith and respect for our youth that are coming up, because I think they are educated because it's humanized to them, right? They're at school with different, you know, same-sex couples. There is trans people at school. There is, you know, and that's what they've grown up with. Whereas our parents, per se, or their parents, they never saw that. You know, so I think that comes back to the whole humanization. No one's taught to hate, you know, no one's taught to hate, or sorry, people are taught to hate, right? So if that's what your grandparents did and that's what they did, and that's instilled in you, then that, you know, but if this new generation, I find very promising. And I think, you know, we have to give them a lot of respect and credit, in the inclusivity space. And I really see that day to day with our young group of athletes and around the G. You know, it's not even an issue at Don Mills. We're around the G. For me, at least, I don't know what they say behind my back, but no one said. I also am 6'4", so if someone wanted to say something to me, they may have other issues. So we'll see.
Well, nicely said, for sure. I find it interesting in the credit to the youth, and it's true. A lot of it is exposure and being aware, like we've talked about, and for Kurt and You Can Play, how much do you really attest that education piece to, if, let's say, the parents, for example, or the grandparents, or those who may not have been exposed to it, how key is that in You Can Play's work to making that inclusive space?
Absolutely key. And I think education is one part of it. Proximity, like Bayne said, is another huge one. And proximity breeds understanding. It just breeds a quick conversation. You're stuck on a road trip together, and you end up having a chat. Proximity is everything when it comes to understanding. And I think some of the challenge that you mentioned, maybe in some of the areas that are not as populous, is that you simply don't have proximity to a certain kind of person. And I think that that's one of the things that we've suffered through in different areas. And we get, well, this is gonna fly in Toronto, right? And this education is great here, but what happens when we go, to the Northern Territories or something else? It's like, well, listen, we'll deal with that as we go. But I think we find proximity is now more places than it was in the past. I think that's been key to it. And I think for the kids growing up, it's exactly that. They've had proximity and understanding. And the other part of it is a younger generation deals with identity in a very different way. And that's one of the biggest changes we've seen, which is the load-bearing walls of your identity house are very different for our parents and our grandparents than it is for our kids. And that's been a very unique change in that malleable identity items like sexuality or gender identity are malleable to a younger generation, when an older generation does not understand that being a changeable or malleable identity piece. I don't wrap my mind around that. And that's one of our biggest things that we highlight around lack of understanding, is that these things are now malleable to a newer generation. And that's why the lack of understanding is happening, in that they thought it was a set it and forget it. Once I do this, that's you for life, and that doesn't change. And it's like, listen, just keep having those conversations, because again, it could change. And that's why a younger generation is more, I think, more accepting and more open to these things. I think you also see them potentially being utilized by those who want to do bad and evil, in that they're being weaponized in that same way. And so they're very impressionable. They're still going to take on messages that aren't positive. They're still going to have some of those things happen. And you see the outcomes of those things, Colorado Springs being one of those. And it's heartbreaking to see that still happens. But I think by and large, that generation, it's also why, to Bayne's point, they said, listen, our parents' generation, it was like, maybe 4 to 5% of the population fell into the LGBTQ class at some point. And now it's like 20 or 30% of millennials are falling within that space. And it's not that there's more gay people out there. It's simply that I think that, first of all, they're able to speak their truth, come out to friends, and be vocal. And also, it's a movement and a group of people that I want to identify with. And straight allies are identifying with that organization, with people, because it's open, positive, accepting, loving, and it lets people perform better. I think that's where we're seeing that change happen, which is it's a good group to support and be a part of. There's not a downside here. Like it's letting people live the way that they need to live. And then I think that translates immediately to performance. I think that's what we try to say is, do you want people to do the best in school, on the ice, as human beings and citizens? Then you want them to be their true selves. And part of that's going to be their sexuality or gender identity. And without that, you're cutting off a piece of who they are, and they're going to struggle within that every single day, and likely leave that thing. So they're going to leave hockey, or they're going to leave school, or they're going to, at the worst of it, leave life in certain cases where they don't find support networks. And that's really what the fight continues on with, is that we have to allow for these support networks to thrive. And sport being, I think, the front of political change for me, which is why I work in it and why I do this work, because I see what sport does to make somebody a better leader, a better teammate, a better friend, a better citizen, and a better, eventual worker down the road, CEO of whatever they want to do. That translates, of course, into political issues, if you want to call them that, but it's simply being good people. I think that's where sport can lead the way in that. And I think that, like Bayne says, credit to the G, because you do a lot of this great work. And again, you're going to see those future leaders. I would imagine in your ranks over the past bunch of years, you can pick out leaders of industry, of community, mayors, city council members, and everything else, because they learned that within their sport education. And there's no reason why this shouldn't be part and parcel to that.
Well said. Absolutely. And a lot of our discussion is around the progress. And I absolutely do think that there's been progress in a variety of ways in sport and in society. But we'll go back to maybe year one of You Can Play, Kurt. Do you think you're facing the same challenges today as You Can Play was in year one?
No, Large, yes, small no. So the locker room was, I think, overtly homophobic at certain places in 2012, and I really the organization got started years before in form, and then really got finalized and action kicked off in 2012. But I think what you found a lot more overt homophobia, and a lot more words that were being used in locker rooms or on the ice or in any sport. Really, it's not hockey alone. It was much more overt in the words that were being used and how they were being accepted. And I think if you listen to broadcasts of NHL games from the, go way back, but even broadcasters would use words like pansy or sissy, or those sorts of things were hockey words, and they're not homophobic, or they weren't misgendering. Those are hockey words. So I think that's where we found that the issue was different, because it was maybe more blatant. And I think the issue is not gone. It's changed to much more subtle homophobia. And so that's the death by a thousand cuts idea, where, That's So Gay is one of those examples. Misgendering someone, say, gosh, you're playing like a boy or a girl, depending on, which team you're on. And that's a very small thing that, again, it just starts to cut, and it starts to cut, and it happens again and again. And it doesn't even have to happen to you. It can happen adjacent to you. Like Bayne said, is Bayne in the room? Can we say this? That's something that, of course, that's getting said then when that person's not in the room. And a lot of times they end up being in the room or in the locker room or on the trip, and they hear those things, or something gets said and a coach just lets it breeze right by, because, like, I don't have time. I'm busy. I got to get to these skills. We don't have time to sit down and have a whole conversation. And so it just kind of gets let go by. The overt stuff, I think, is being handled really well right now. When we hear it, racist remarks, homophobic remarks, we stop and we address them. It's that subtle stuff that really, it's like, God, do I have time for this? And we do a lot of this work with referees who are on the ice or on the field or on the courts. They hear a lot of this stuff in the heat of action. Do you penalize it, or do you just let it go and say, gosh, there's enough going on here. I'm struggling to even keep up with this game. Do I just let it go? And I think that's where we see the issues still happening, is in that casual stuff. And even in the younger generations, sometimes it's trying to use words where I take it back, and I'm trying to, take the power from it and use it as a positive. It's like, well, listen, do you know how that lands with other people who don't know you're trying to do that? And so it's that kind of education and having those conversations.
Absolutely. And for Bayne, we're going to dig up your roots here in the hockey world. I believe you had two great uncles play in the NHL in the original six era, and you had a brother play in the NHL for 10 years, I believe. And just seeing the generations here, I'm going to tack on to the generations of hockey here, and now leading to you. Obviously, no one can counter the progress between many generations there. But for you, what do you think is still left in terms of making those extra steps to make that extra progress?
Yeah, that's correct there. I did have actually a great nickname for my great uncle, Eric Cowboy Pettinger. So, I don't know how he got that, but I'm sure we could go back in the history books. And then my brother Matt, 7 years older than me, played for Washington for about 8 years with Ovechkin, and then Vancouver and Tampa. So, my other brother Reed played, my dad, my uncle. So come from definitely a hockey family. For me, Kurt talked about, the growing numbers of, people that identify in the community. I think that needs to be reflective in leadership within the game. Whether it's, Hockey Canada is going through a bit of a reform here with their board rebranding. I hope that we have seats at tables, because we are, if we are 25% of the active community, then why don't we have, whether it's at the G or at the NHL level, or, in positions of power to share our expertise in the space and create a safe space. If we don't have it, it's all good for us to do this, but if we don't have people in leadership positions that can drive change or put a perspective on it, then really we're just barking up a tree, right? I think it's important, and I hope that Hockey Canada, I'm a proud, Hockey Canada alumnus. Obviously, they've been through some turmoil lately, but I hope that they take this opportunity to reform that board with voices of what the demographic of Canada looks like. People of color, people of the LGBTQ plus community, people from a disabled background to whichever, to properly show what our Canadian demographic is. I know, Kurt, you're in the US there, but with I think Hockey Canada has a huge opportunity here. And for me, that's where the progress comes from, is having seats at those leadership tables, to have a voice, to really drive change. And for me, I opened with this, but I think humanization, the more that I can get out there, even if my little Don Mills Flyers, hear something on the ice from another team or at school or something, and they go, hey, our coach is gay. You don't say that, and create those allyships and normalize. And whether it's our parents as well. I've had chats with them, off the record. They ask how my experience has been. And I think if you can put a face to something, right? If you can go, oh, this member of the Hockey Canada board, or this member, this NHLPA agent, and if you don't think something's been, you don't see something ahead of you that's been done before, you don't think it's possible, right? So, I do advertise that I'm the only openly gay NHLPA certified agent, but I think there's going to be more to come, because now people have seen that, oh, you could do that. Oh, you could be a GM, a scout, whichever. You can have a great career in the game of hockey and be gay. It doesn't matter. And that's where I kind of lean my hat on, is just out there every day trying to humanize. I'm open to have conversations, do podcasts like this, I speak to some OHL teams. I work with, Brock McGillis on a few things. I think it's Curtis Gabriel. I think it's important just to get out there and be loud and proud and march in the pride parades, and, have Morgan Riley with me, and he sees that they're with me. And it's as Kurt said, it's love. And it's, like, if you're into denying people their truth and happiness, then there's something seriously wrong with you. And, and I hate to say it, but that's a you problem. That's not an us problem. And, I'm unapologetic about that if someone's a bigot or someone's a racist or someone, that's their problem. And I'm not going to go back in the closet or, stop making the progress that we're making in the hockey space, because hockey's a great game. It's a fantastic game. I wouldn't be where I am without the game. My family wouldn't be, but yeah, it has some ways to go, but we're coming, and it's awesome. And I love it that we're having these open conversations. This wouldn't have happened 10 years ago, that we're having these conversations, right? And I think, again, that's another humanization piece, to break down barriers, and I think that's really what I stand on, is getting out in front of it and being out there.
Bayne, I love that.
Well said.
Yeah. Stephanie, if I can piggyback off of what Bayne just said, a lot of times we get the question around why can't I, as a cis white male straight, sit on a board and represent an organization or a people or a race, a gender, or otherwise that's not me. I can sit in their shoes for a couple of minutes and try to, be the filter that needs to happen on that decision-making process. And sometimes that's the case, and we appreciate those people who raise the hand and attempt it. But a lot of times what you find is it's the small items at that leadership level that make the biggest difference. What does our flyer look like that we just put out for our team? What is that something that we ever considered? What faces are on that flyer, or what the language look like on there? And it's that small stuff that adds up a lot through leadership. And I think the Hockey Canada is a good example. A lot of times at the national level, you have to have an athlete on your board from your teams that you actually represent. And the reason is, are we remembering the athlete in every decision we're making? Because again, that's the end result of what we're doing. And I think, Bayne, I love that idea of just the thought through that, which is, it's not like necessarily a quota system where we have maybe, it's percentages and everything else, but just have we thought this through, and have we opened it up and recruited leadership and coaching and otherwise to represent us in this appropriate way, in that the kids won't come if they don't see themselves in the league and they don't see themselves in the sport. And I think that's such an important thing. And again, it's not the big issues of our big diversity and inclusion plan that we now have and we stamp our name on. It's not about that. It's the everyday small stuff that adds up a lot and makes a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. We could not agree more. And on that note, I don't think I can sum either of those up better than both of you, but I will pass it to both of you for any final thoughts. Bayne, anything else that you'd like to share with us today?
Yeah, no, I think I said it all there, but, let's just keep pushing the needle on everything, diversity and inclusion. I know it's a hot topic right now, and it's kind of a high level goal, but it's daily activities. Like Kurt said, you can go death by 1,000 cuts, or you can build up by 1,000 bricks. And I think that's what we need to do is, educate, empower, humanize, and really just ask questions. Don't be afraid. It's not a taboo subject. It's not this it's not a sickness. It's actually a health. And speak to people. And if someone lean on resources, this social media world, we can all be connected. And I'm happy to talk to anyone, anytime, anywhere, and reach out for those that are struggling, because I've been through that, where you don't think you can jump, or you can, be in the hockey world and be openly gay and an advocate. And it's actually quite the opposite. It's opened many doors for me. And it's, I wish I did it many years sooner, knowing now what the reaction would be, but hindsight's 2020. So let's just keep the momentum going, keep having honest conversations, keep amplifying. It doesn't have to be just in the month of June. But yeah, let's just keep it going here. And thank you for having me on today.
Thank you, Bayne. And we'll give Kurt any final thoughts.
He wrapped it up really well, but I'd say to his point as well, the year-round item, we try to, DEI is a category, but we don't want to be stuck just in that one bucket of, like, when we review our plan and during June and those kind of items, diversity and including, differing kids or athletes or participants of differing sexuality, gender identities. It's a success and a winning strategy as much as it is an inclusion strategy, in that we don't know what these kids will develop into. We don't know who's going to grow. We don't know who's going to develop a slap shot in the way that they are, who's going to become a great skater. We don't see that until they mature through hockey or through any sport. And so diversity on your team is the best winning strategy. Retention as a coach is more important than recruiting those two great athletes who are going to play on the provincial team. That's just the reality of what it is, because having great retention means those kids stick with hockey, meaning hockey's better and stronger, meaning our national team does better, NHL looks better, and the kids have a better experience. So I think this is where it's a winning strategy, because the kids will do better on the ice, will mature better through the sport and participate better and give you a better result. And I think that's really, we want to be able to put both down there, which is, it's the right thing to do, heart and soul. It's also a winning strategy to what you're trying to get done. It's all those things. And look at it in that way. And that way, I think you approach it, hopefully, those who are working in administration or coaching or just a parent of an athlete, approach it in a hopefully unique and refreshed way.
If I can just hit on one more thing there.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, just on, and I deal with it daily. I think this is, kind of beyond what we're talking about here, but I see it a lot in the G. It's either NHL or bust with these players, and it's like a failure if they don't make it there. Like, if you look at the real numbers, it's extremely hard. I think like literally 0.001% that you play in the NHL, but hockey is such a great game that there's so many different avenues that you can explore. Like, I retired, quote unquote, at 18 playing junior hockey, and now I'm an NHLPA agent. You can be a coach, you can be a media member, you can be the next Bob McKenzie, you can be the next Elliot Friedman. You can, there's trainers, there's managers, there's executives, there's, hockey can provide so many opportunities off the ice. So whether you're playing AAA or single A or whatever, beer league with your buddies, keep going. My dad always said it best, hockey's a contact sport on and off the ice, and it's building your network and getting out there, because whether you work at the G or the OHL or the NHL, there's so many careers. And I think we can get in this, kind of chamber that it's NHL or bust, or else it's a waste of time. No, we're growing young people to contribute to society, because even for the NHL players, hockey ends, right? Hockey ends at age, if they're lucky enough, age 30. What are they doing with the rest of their life, right? And what life skills are they gaining now about sportsmanship, teammate, compassion, empathy, to circle it back. But I just want to hit on that I think we can just get so hyper-focused on playing in the NHL, or else it's a waste of time. And I think that we need to expand that we're growing young leaders here that are going to represent the game of hockey and hopefully play it for the rest of their life, because it is a great game.
Well, it's absolutely about the person first rather than the player. And we're at the G, we're very lucky to have, partners like You Can Play who are going to further assist us in those goals. And obviously, Bayne, in your several hats, but also directly as a coach and influencing those young athletes directly right at the ground level. So we're very lucky to have you both, and we're super appreciative that you could give up some of your time today to have this important conversation. And I'm sure we'll be seeing you, Bayne, in the rinks, and Kurt in our conversations as we move forward. So thanks so much to you both.
Thanks, Bayne. Thanks, Stephanie. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
And as this has been an absolutely great conversation on the GTHL's Breakout Podcast, we're looking forward to having a lot more off-ice stories and discussions just like this one.